No, so if one slot, then I have to the gateway central you're talking to has to remember for each device.
That's why it was kind of important to get it done. The clicker doesn't work.
So if we have firmware, we have some reasons obviously that's right.
There's this one.
Then somehow anything gets configured by other man.
Let's give this a try.
That might mean that actually
if they're paired, that's not
or
we may be clicking this.
Ground.
I think we're clickerless. All right. We're ready to get started in a few minutes' time.
Every 4 to 3 years, someone comes along.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ACE. You made it to the last session here on Thursday, so happy to see you. I'm Roman Dinetti with my co-chair here.
Jim.
Why don't we get started? It's been a long week. So you've probably seen the note well a number of times. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to ask us. We have an agenda, but before we jump into that, we're going to be passing around the blue sheets. Do we have a Jabber scribe and a note taker we could rely upon? Would anyone be willing to be a Jabber scribe? Okay, that's great. That's a Jabber scribe. Much appreciated, a team of 2. And anyone can take minutes for us. Etherpad or whatever works for you. We need a minute taker. We would greatly appreciate a minute taker. We cannot proceed without a minute taker.
Right there.
Right on. Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so what you see displayed now is the agenda. We roughly sent around the mailing list. We've had to just reshuffle kind of some of them to be around the documents first that were working group last call, and then the others after that. Primarily, we're talking about the drafts, and then we're going to talk about adopting potentially some drafts at the end. Would anyone like to bash this agenda? Okay, I'm not hearing that, so let's proceed forward. Just to quickly update everyone on where we stand with drafts, we did a working group last call starting in early October in preparation for this meeting, so we knew where we stood with the issues. Those were the 4 documents that went into working group last call, and that link, if you do reference, is a top line kind of summary of the major comments that came up with all the documents, and looking at all the individual presentations that are coming with those drafts. We're going to talk in a lot more detail about that. We also have a document in Shepherd Review kind of with me that I'm working to close the issues from the last working group last call. And there was also a hackathon, if someone would like to come to the mic and say what happened at the hackathon. Nothing. Okay, so nothing to talk about there. Okay, milestone-wise, we haven't changed anything since we last got together. We're a little behind on some of those. And so when we talk on a per draft level in the presentations, we're going to talk through how quickly we can move forward with those documents. So with that, we have nothing more. So first up is we're going to talk about the framework technical documents, and Ludwig is going to go remote for us with the presentation. So Ludwig, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Let me switch to your slides, and I will drive for you. Okay.
Thank you very much. So this is about the draft we call the framework, OAuth, and I hid the typo here. It's actually about version 16, not about 13, as it says here. That's for me for copy pasting from last meeting.
Excuse me, Ludwig. Could we ask the folks modulating the AV to crank it down a little bit? It's a little loud. Okay. Sorry about that, Ludwig. It was just very loud in the room. No, you're good. Thanks.
Okay. So there's a typo here. It should say draft OAuth 16, not 13. I carried that over by copy pasting my template from the last meeting. Sorry for that. And the other draft I'm going to mention is the parameters draft, which is basically a split out from version 13 of the framework. Why that was done, I will tell you when we get there. So please, next slide. Major changes from version 13 that you have seen at the last IETF meeting to version 16, where we are now, is we split out a number of parameters used both for interaction with the token endpoint and the introspection endpoint into a separate draft. That is the parameters draft I was just talking about. The reason for this is that there is some parallel work on this stuff in OAuth, and I discussed that with chairs, and the proposal was to split out those parameters in a separate document that OAuth, when they figure out how they want to solve that, can obsolete or update or whatever they want without affecting the framework document. So that was the reason why we split those things out. In the process of splitting them out, we also had to rename some parameters, namely the audience parameter, which is now called requested audience, and certain uses of the confirmation parameter, which are now called requested confirmation, because there were collisions with uses of these parameters in with other meanings in OAuth. So there is a number of smaller name changes, nothing major functional, I hope, that are documented in this parameters draft. Another largish change, I introduced a content type, a co-op content type for ACE messages, ACE plus CBOR, that is intended for use in co-op. I added registrations as claims, as access token claims for certain things that previously only were parameters, that is the resource server confirmation and the profile. Reason for that is that you might have a resource server that has several, well, let's first go through the parameters. Resource server conf is a parameter that is used by the authorization server to inform the client about the public key of the resource server, so that the resource server then can authenticate to the client, for example, in a DTLS raw public key handshake. And the reason we also added a claim, token claim for this parameter, was that the resource server might manage several public keys, for example, for different curves or so. And this is a way for the authorization server to tell the resource server, this is the public key I communicated to the client, use that to authenticate. So that's the first one. The second one, profile, is basically the same argument. You could have a resource server that supports different profiles, and this parameter tells the resource, or this claim, access token claim, tells like the resource server, this is the profile the authorization server has selected that you should use to communicate with the client. So that covers the third bullet. Fourth bullet, we noticed that we had a very old issue that we should explain how the ACE framework works with refresh tokens, and I had a contribution from my co-author Eric that was merged into the document then to explain how these are used. Basically, we don't expect that they are typically going to be used in constrained scenarios, but if they're going to be used, there's now text referring to how that is intended to work. Next bullet is the added text about using RFC 6750 error codes. So I discovered, I hadn't looked at RFC 6750 lately because it's the bearer tokens. We're mainly looking at proof of possession tokens. But I recently discovered that there are a number of very useful error codes in that document. So I've now added a section that refers to it and that explains the use of these error codes and defines CBOR abbreviations for these error codes. And lastly, we defined a new error code for incompatible request parameters. So for example, if a client requests an access token for a certain resource server and they don't support a common proof of possession method, then the authorization server can reply with this new error, telling the client, look, there's no compatible way for you and this resource server to communicate. Okay, next slide, please. Now I have two slides with items that I would like to discuss. Most of them are points that were raised in the working group last call. So let me say 2 sentences about the working group last call. There have been very good discussions around the documents, and I haven't managed to address all these items that were raised. What I did manage is to create issues in the issue trackers of both the framework and the parameters document that hopefully represent the questions raised by the reviewers, and I'm planning to address those issues as soon as I can. But in those discussions, there were a number of questions raised that are not, according to my interpretation, don't have an obvious answer. And this is what I wanted to discuss now, or wanted to present now, and hopefully we will have an in-room discussion then. So first one is a repeated question or discussion from the last meeting, the use of low-digit abbreviations. So just to summarize what the problem is about, for parameters and for certain parameter values in the interactions with the authorization server, we are providing CBOR abbreviations. Now, CBOR abbreviations, integer abbreviations, have a very short representation for values ranging from, I think, -23 to +23 or something like that. So there's a limited number range where you get a very compact abbreviation, and abbreviations higher than this number, you get a 2-byte representation in CBOR. So these low-digit abbreviations are obviously very valuable, and there has been a discussion about which parameters are frequently enough used that they merit such a short abbreviation. I think I reached a agreement between me and Mike Jones on that, but I wanted to give you the occasion to raise other opinions at this point. Anyone who wants to comment on the assignment of low abbreviations and what OAuth parameters are frequently enough used that they merit a short abbreviation? I'm not seeing
no
anyone
one's coming up to the mic.
Yeah, I have a picture of the room so I can see you not rushing to the mic. Thank you. Second point, there has been also a discussion related to this abbreviation. So what I have done so far, for reasons of making implementations or implementers' lives easier, is that I try to align all the abbreviations. So in order to understand the issue is, we have claims that go into access tokens. We have parameters that go into the requests and response to the token and to the introspection endpoint. And all these I have tried to align into one single abbreviation number space. There have been discussions now on the mailing list whether that is a good idea or not. And in the light of these discussions, I've come to the conclusion that it's probably not such a good idea to align both claim abbreviations and parameter abbreviations. But I wanted to raise that discussion as well. Do we want to have like a unified abbreviation space for all these things, or do we want to separate claims and protocol parameters? Do people have opinions on that?
That mic isn't hot.
It is on. Mike Jones, Microsoft. I believe, as discussed on the list, that there should be separate numeric spaces for parameters and claims. Among other things, that lets you use the small numbers for parameters.
Jim Schott from the floor. I went to the Ratsbach this week, and they're another group which wants to use CWTs and talking about registering CWT claims. So I think we should probably get a story together on how we think this should work, and using the same registry for all 7.
We lost the mic. We lost the mic. Could the AV gentleman in the back help with the mic, please?
Right.
No. Good idea. Thank you, Francesca. Yeah.
I went to the Ratsbach this week, and that was another group that is talking about registering CWT claims. So I think we need to develop a common story on how we think all of these claims should be registered as CWTs, in terms of probably the best answer is to say register a CW claim, which is a map which is identifying the fact that your claims, and then you can have your own registry rather than having everybody fight for the same numbers.
So, Carsten Bormann, how many media types do you have?
Me?
Yes.
There is currently the one defined that is ACE plus CBOR or CBOR plus ACE. I don't.
So how do I know whether something is a CWT or something is a request?
Well, CWT is usually sent as a parameter in one of your messages.
Okay.
So there is like a tag that says access token equals or so, and then the content of that, a parameter, sorry, that says access token, and the content of that is a CWT. But that would be the next bullet point, actually.
Yeah, so I think the important thing is that something that I, as a participant in this communication, might want to save, to say somebody claimed this, and I may need to go to court with it. That probably should be formatted as a CWT.
Mm-hmm. I see the queue has emptied, so I'll go on to the third point, which is a bit about what Carsten just mentioned. There has been a somehow parallel discussion about the use of CWTs as a format for signed protocol messages. So the idea is that instead of just sending a bunch of CBOR a map with CBOR parameters in it, you would send a CWT containing your parameters. And this would actually affect a lot whether we have a common registry for parameters and claims, because then suddenly your parameters become claims in a CWT. The advantage, as far as I understood, is that certain use cases require signed protocol messages, and that CWT would allow you to do that. I haven't quite considered if there are any bigger drawbacks aside from that you have to have a common registry now for everything. You could always use the solution that Jim proposed and just like create another parameter that is actually forming a namespace for your claims, and then you skip all the potential collisions. But that is basically the question, I think, that Karsten was raising. Yes, please.
Ben Kaduk, I just, thinking about CWTs as signed protocol messages, I was going to point out that in the ACME group, they recently changed, or well, they introduced a scheme to use JOTs for signed protocol messages, and then later heavily revised their spec to use that for all protocol messages.
Mike Jones, as discussed on the list, both use of JOTs as signed protocol messages was standardized by OpenID Connect in 2014 and is being standardized by the OAuth working group, hopefully to finish this year. It had been stalled over technicalities, but we believe it goes to the RFC editor anytime. And given that the ACE OAuth authc framework is trying to reuse OAuth as much as possible, I think it's very logical to use CWTs as the signed protocol messages, just like OAuth does. And this is in production for banking, among other things.
Mike, well, one more second before you leave the mic. I was under the impression that there was some contention on the OAuth mailing list whether all OAuth protocol messages should be formatted as JOTs. I seem to recall to read a message where someone said, no, not for introspection or something like that. Is it really for all, like for interactions with token endpoints, introspection endpoints, and what was the other, the grant endpoint? Or is it just for specific interactions that...
The OAuth draft, I believe, is scoped strictly to the authorization request. And Torsten Lauterstadt has a separate one for responses that also formats them as JOTs. You could do that for other endpoints, like the introspection endpoint, but OAuth isn't doing that at present.
Okay, thank you. So my only worry with this is if we try to align with OAuth, how is that going to delay the working group last call and then publication of the ACE framework? Because we are already quite delayed, and I'm a bit wary of introducing dependencies on ongoing work in OAuth.
You wouldn't introduce a normative dependency on the OAuth jar draft, the signed request draft. You would probably, as an editor, have a non-normative reference saying that when signed, ACE OAuth requests are CWTs, just like this draft makes signed JOT requests. So you wouldn't introduce a delay in progressing the document. Frankly, as editor, you've already done most of the work to align the parameter spaces. All you have to do is register them and you're done.
Good. That leads us to another point of alignment with ongoing... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Jim Schutt. I don't think we even need the the informational reference at the moment, unless we're actually going to document that we are going to carry those messages right now in the framework.
So, Jim, are you suggesting that this might be a add-on draft that we start and complete at a later point of time that specifies how you, instead of sending the parameters as like a parameter map, you instead put them into a CWT? Would that be a workable solution?
Right. At a later date, we could document how the message that goes from the client to the AS instead of being an application ACE plus CBOR, would be an application CWT.
ACE plus CWT, I would
or whatever,
prefer.
yeah.
But yeah, get it. Okay. Fourth bullet, alignment with ongoing OAuth work. Well, other alignment with ongoing OAuth work. So we had a discussion during the working group last call reviews about our requested audience parameter versus a parameter called resource defined in draft IETF OAuth resource indicators. And my conclusion after comparing those two is that there's a slight difference, or not difference, but the requested audience seems to me to be a bit broader than the resource parameter that is specified in the OAuth draft. So just to give you a quick run through for those who haven't read the resource indicators draft, it defines this new parameter for a token request with whom the client can indicate the location of the resource or service it is trying to access. That is the specification of this resource parameter. Now, my understanding of how this requested audience is supposed to be used is that you can put anything application specific in it that somehow the resource server can resolve to being part of this audience or not. So you could have like a group identifier or a public key of the resource server or whatever. And this would not necessarily refer to the location of the resource or service that you're trying to scope your token to. So I see a difference there. Hannes.
Hi, Ludwig. That's true. That's indeed a difference. But the reason why we try to be a little bit more specific in the resource identifiers is that it makes the implementation on the resource server simpler, because there's a standardized way on how you do the comparison. Because in the other case, you have to have some other out-of-band configuration to find out what is the semantic of the stuff that you're actually shuffling around. Is that sort of indicating some group of things, or is it like you said, the hash of a public key and so on? So you are essentially doing what some people do today. They munch that, overload the scope field and with some opaque thingy, and they basically do all this out of band in a configuration. So that would sort of the approach chosen, a resource indicator, makes this comparison more precise. So that's the sort of like, there's obviously pros and cons, but I'm wondering whether you had some specific use cases in mind that require this sort of more relaxed way of dealing with things at the expense of having an out-of-band configuration approach.
No, as you know, I am a researcher. I don't have specific use cases. The question that I found also pretty relevant here is the difficulty of actually pinpointing the location of a resource with a URL in the constrained space. I mean, as I think Steffi was it who mentioned that URLs of constrained devices can change when they like travel from one network to another. And this makes the use of this resource parameter a bit tricky for me if you don't have some other way of that is static, that identifies the resource server.
Mm-hmm.
I would be at a loss how to give good guidance how to use that in constrained space if we switch to the definition from the resource indicators draft.
Yeah, I see. Good question. Yeah. It's a tricky thing. And do you want to think about it and get back to us? I think I would have
I guess we can carry on the mailing list with that discussion. Next slide, please.
Before you go to there, There was another one that they were asking about, which that was not quite aligned. Was that just a textual difference?
Which one? I don't recall.
The confirmation, I think. They said was.
I was under the impression that this was pretty well aligned because it is basically the same as RFC 7800. And well, I think it's a difference of names. I think in the POP key exchange draft it's called key, and I chose to retain the original name of the claim with conf. But I think that is just cosmetic. We can align that to what.
Yeah, I think I changed that. I still have to do another update because preparing the slides for the OAuth meeting, I noticed that I still had a few glitches in there. So I will do the update based on this update. So I think it would be much better.
Good. I have not a strong opinion on that one. It's just cosmetic, as I said. Okay. Now Hannes is blocking the. No, you're not. Now, multiple tokens for one resource server and one client. This was another discussion raised during the working group last call. The situation would be this. I'm a client. I have an access token for a certain resource server. I'm doing stuff with that access token, and then I hit an unauthorized. So I go back to the authorization server and request a new token that gives me those additional rights. Now, what happens? What is supposed to happen at the resource server if I submit this new token? Is the new token supposed to amend the older ones so that all the tokens together form the space of my permissions? Or is every newer tokens for this client going to overwrite all the older ones, which would then require the authorization server to make the newer tokens like a collection of all the previous permissions that I have asked for? So the first option is what I currently have implemented and what I think is currently also suggested, not explicitly stated in the draft. The second option, that your tokens override all the ones, so in a relation between one client and one resource server, you only ever have one active token, has the advantage that it simplifies the management of the tokens a lot at the resource server. And since the resource servers are often the constrained devices, I feel that might be a good approach. But I wanted to hear if anyone in the room has any strong feelings about not using this option 2, where we only have one resource between a resource server, one token between a resource server and a client. I'm not seeing people rushing to the microphone. So if anyone comes
Hold on, Ludwig. Hold on.
Yes.
Jim is coming to the mic.
Yep.
It takes a while for me to get in front of the camera.
Sorry.
I don't have a strong feeling, but there are two comments that I'd like to raise. One is many times the newer token may be for a much shorter lifetime than the older token, which means you're basically going to expire the token sooner. The second one is I know that there is a draft in the OAuth working group about doing incremental updates that I haven't actually read through and understood, and I'm wondering if that is relevant.
Yeah, we should definitely have a look at that.
So from the jabber, Olaf says +1 for option 2.
Olaf is doing a constrained implementation, so I have a lot of sympathy for his preference for this easier to handle at the resource server. He knows how difficult it is to manage option 1. Okay, we can carry on that on the mailing list if anyone comes up with other points for that. Next one is a old mechanism I had in the draft for expiration of tokens based on sequence numbers. The background was that at some point we were considering that there might be constrained devices that do not have an internal clock, and therefore no means of ever expiring a token. So I at that point added a description of a mechanism whereby for every token that is issued for a specific resource server, the authorization server would add a sequence number to that token. And then the resource server, after receiving tokens with a certain sequence number, would start to expire tokens with a much lower sequence number. Obviously, this is not extremely resilient against attacks that suppress the submission of new tokens and so on, but it was meant as the best effort. Like, if you don't have any means of measuring time, this is the best you could do. This has generated a lot of discussion, since obviously it is not very secure against any kinds of attacks that try to prevent the expiry of the tokens. So my feeling at this moment is, since this is a very improbable use case, where the following discussions showed that like almost every device should at least have an internal clock with some wall clock time, so that they could do an expiration based on so and so many seconds from when you receive this token. This mechanism seems obsolete. So my suggestion would be to remove that if no one violently disagrees at this point. I don't see anyone.
No one is running up to the mic.
Running up. Great. Last point then, symmetric confirmation keys and multi-resource server audiences. So the case that I had in the document was that imagine an access token issued to a group of resource servers identified by a certain audience, and that where the proof of possession key is a symmetric key embedded in the token. And I was arguing that this should not be done, because then the first resource server who gets this token can impersonate the client towards any other member of this audience. Now, Jim has raised some valid concerns that this might actually still be necessary in some multicast use cases. And I wanted to open up this discussion because I am not sure which is the best way to go here. Should we recommend against using symmetric confirmation keys in case your audience is more than one resource server? Or are there valid use cases where we need to be able to do that?
Jim Schott. After thinking about this, I think that I would be perfectly happy to say we stay as should not for now, and we wait for the use case to show up and fix the documents at that point if needed.
Yes.
Ben Kadek, basically the same thing. It would make me pretty uncomfortable to allow it. So we need to have a good use case in mind.
Is should not strong enough then, or no? It should not, or should we say what is it? The stronger one, not allowed or not?
Must not.
Yeah, must
or
not.
Not recommended.
Stronger. I think it would depend on the surrounding text.
Okay, let's do a second go through on that on the mailing list. I think I've already gone over my speaking time. This was my next to last slide. So next slide, please. So my next steps, I'm planning to address the working group last call comments and the results of this discussion as they manifest themselves on the mailing lists and in the minutes. And for anyone who wants to follow the progress, you can see the issues on the issue tracker on the GitHub of the working group. I've tried to capture all the working group last call comments, except for minor editorial comments, which I'm fixing as I go. So if you want to see that I've genuinely captured your working group last call comments, please have a look at the issue list, and if there's anything wrong there, then please correct me. Thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Ludwig, before you go, can you give me a rough idea of when you think you're going to publish the next version?
I have a project, the project that is funding my IETF work, ending right now. So I will be very busy during November and December. So unless I get some substantial help from my co-authors, this might take a while. I mean, I can, of course, squeeze in a few hours here and there, but this is like a final review of a 3-year project, and I'm the responsible for the whole Swedish consortium, which is 4 companies. So I'm going to be pretty busy with that.
So January.
No, sorry. The final review meeting is in first half of December. So like second half of December up to Christmas, I'm hoping to be able to squeeze in enough to address all of the comments. Okay. I will of course start addressing comments as soon as I can, as soon as I can squeeze in time. But sadly, the agenda has been filling up pretty quickly.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay, next up on the agenda, Goran is going to talk to us about the DTLS profile. And the clicker does not work, so please just say next slide.
So this is a DTLS profile, and these slides are prepared by Olaf, who unfortunately has a sore throat, so he can't speak. So I'm going to flip through his slides as best as I can. Next slide, please. Yeah, the current version is 05. Since version 3, there was not so much content change. There was an improved readability, cleanup of examples, and looking at cozy structures. We got a really good working group last call review by Jim, and that's there was an answer where we did some of the changes have we already implemented. Some are in the answer as proposal. So unless you have any objections, those will also be implemented. And then there are 4 issues we'd like to speak about here. Next slide, please. So the first comment was about an example where this is a symmetric key case, and there is a response on the post token. So the AS sends information to the client about what key to use to communicate with the resource server, and this didn't include a key identifier, which means that you need to, which is basically a handle for updating the privileges. So the proposal here is that we actually write that this should be included to simplify for updating the privileges. Yeah, Hannes.
So this is is the client supposed to send a key ID to the authorization server, or is it the other way around, that the authorization server provides a key ID back to the client?
Yes, it's going back. The AS should add the key ID.
But the AS can provide that key ID already, since it's sending a key. That comes along with a key ID.
Exactly, that was just missing.
Oh, okay.
So
it's just an existing missing example. Okay.
Yeah. Jim Schott. Actually, I think this whole issue has been overtaken by events in that instead of using the mechanism we were looking at, we should actually be using refresh tokens, not setting up the key ID.
All right. In that case, it's obsolete. Okay. So I don't know if I need to go to the related question then, but basically, to answer the related question is, do we need a special treatment for RPA case? And I would assume you would use the same mechanism there. Okay, great. Next slide. This comment I actually didn't really understand, so let's see if I can sort it out. Basically, the response, again, this is the same type of response. It's a cozy key coming from the AS to the client. But there was a question about the length of the key, length of the key that's going to be used. So if a client is offering both AES-128 and AES-256, what length should be used here of the key? And that's, well, if someone has a good answer there, I'm not really sure I understand the question myself.
So so I don't remember. I only remember the JWK answer to this, and there was actually an algorithm ID which provides you exactly that information. So you would include, so the example above would then also include the algorithm ID. Okay, fair enough. Yes. And I would assume that the COSI key has the same information in there. Yes. If it doesn't, then that would be an oversight.
Okay, that was actually the alternative. That was most likely. Okay, great. Then we have a solution to that as well. Next slide, please. This is an easy one. Basically, if there is an error in terms of authorization within the TLS session, you've asked for a resource that you're not authorized to do, or do something you're not authorized to do. That should not be a non-fatal. That should be a non-fatal error from the TLS point of view. So that's, I think that we all agree on that. No comments on that. Okay, that's agreed then. Next and final comment is, so this is about the key derivation. So we have three methods. Basically, either you provide to the resource server a public key, or you provide a symmetric key, or you provide a salt. And the purpose of the salt is to use the shared key between the AS and the RS to derive a key. That's really efficient because the salt could be very compact. And the point is now, how should the conf look like? Should it look like this? It used to be a COSI key, which was absolutely wrong. That was the problem statement here. This was the first proposal. And then I think, as Jim pointed out, is there a middle layer missing here? And I think that's right. So this should actually be, the conf should be, and then we have an identifier, and that identifier should in turn contain the salt and these parameters. So that's the proposal, to introduce something like ACE salt, and that contains key type, derivation algorithm, and the actual salt.
Jim Schott, I don't even remember this as being in the version I reviewed, and I haven't the foggiest idea what this thinks is doing.
Sorry? You haven't the foggiest idea what?
I don't know what this is. I don't know what problem this is trying to solve.
Okay, so that was the case of having a really compact access token and not actually transporting a key, but just transporting a salt. And you use the key shared between the AS and the RS and the algorithm here to derive the key you're going to use. So this salt only goes to the RS, whereas the client is provided with the key.
This is Hannes. I was wondering whether that's a good idea, because we are now adding another mechanism to it, another possibility that has to be implemented. And I've been working on the slides for the OAuth session, and there obviously it would be nice if the JWT, or JSON-based encoding, matches somehow the CWT encoding from the functionality point of view. And currently, we have already a couple of different mechanisms. So you, in addition to the key transport for symmetric key, you're then adding a sort of a key derivation approach.
Yes. This is definitely the case for 60s, for example, where they really have a hard time of fitting. A CWT doesn't really, really hard to fit into one frame of their transport. So this is typically a use case for them to implement the salt instead of a key.
But I'm sure they have also an adaptation layer. So is that sort of solving their use case?
If you talk to them about multiple fragments versus single fragment, I'm sure you will get the same answer as I get. Basically, can we squeeze this into one fragment? So it's a constrained use case. I don't see any problem with that.
So Ludwig from Jabber, it also has the advantage that an attacker that learns the content of the CNF claim cannot derive the key.
Sure.
Well, the assumption is that there's confidentiality protection between the client and the AS anyway. So, so in that sense, he shouldn't get that information.
It actually depends whether you use, I mean, yes, this would typically be encrypted, but if you use the post to authorization info, it could be, only has to be integrity protected, right?
But yeah, but this, Jim Schott, this is inside the CWT, and the CWT would normally be encrypted.
Okay.
I feel uncomfortable about this because I'm worried about possible problems with the keys being protected correctly. You're adding a key derivation based upon on a secret which is supposed to do one thing to do something else, and I'm just not too happy about that.
I think the intention here was not to use the same key. I mean, to use a derived key. So that thing shouldn't be a problem from the point of view of, I mean, I totally agree with you. Should not reuse the same key. I need to check that whether that is already included in the draft or not. I can't remember that. So, but was that the main concern, basically, that we have a using a, yeah, okay. So, but the question here was actually not, this was, not, the question was actually how would this CNF look like, not whether this method should be used or not. So that seems like a kind of a late discussion.
Mm. So currently, so this is another, so we, at the moment, at least from the JSON-based version, there's only the key container or the JWE, because there's either the encrypted version or non-encrypted version. And so here, how do you then, out of this, I assume you would want to have maybe, do you only want one version, the unencrypted, or do you want to have an encrypted version as well? No encrypted version.
Yeah, I mean, that was Ludwig's comment, whether we should choose it unencrypted. This could very well be encrypted. There's no problem with that. But doesn't add anything.
But then there's, you need to have another wrapper around it.
This, I mean, if this had been a key, you would send the key in a JWE. If this is a salt, you send a salt in a JWE. It's exactly the same procedure.
But the way how the structure looked like in the response parameter, there was a CNF claim that was sent from the AS to the client for consumption by the client. And so how it looked like previously was a CNF inside had either the encrypted version or the key container, the COSI key in this case, or the JW key.
We used to have this in a COSI key, but we realized that that's not the right type of container. So we proposed to define an own container for this. Like, I mean, so you have so what is the analogy? What do we have in the OSCORE profile? We have an OSCORE security context, which contains the parameters needed for OSCORE. And now we have some other name of a CNF, which contains the parameters needed for deriving the key with the salt. I don't see a big difference.
No, it's just wondering like how it would look like. Yeah,
but so I mean, what you just described says in your in your example up there, you're missing a layer.
Yes.
So you should have CNF.
Yes.
Contains a KDF derive, which contains those three parameters.
Exactly. And reading your review comments, it was actually, is there a missing layer on this one? And that's, I certainly agree with. Just want to confirm that here. Okay, that was the last slide. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for your stepping in to also do the presentation. Do we have a sense for when the updates could be made?
So I hope Olaf will do most of the, but I think this is certainly this year, so it should be December.
December?
That's, if I'm going to be involved, it needs to be December, but Olaf might do it quicker, I don't know.
Okay. January, got it, all right. No, I have 2 January. It's the holidays. Let's be realistic. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's right. All right, let me get your slides up, Francesca. Perfect. And again, there's no clicker. It doesn't work, so just tell me next slide, please.
Okay, so OSCOR profile of ACE, we are at version 5 that was submitted 2 days ago, something like that. So next. So the status is being updated according to the working group last call review. We only got review comments from Jim. This is a list of issues that were in the GitHub issue tracker. And we've taken care of those. And the update deals with all of this. But I still want to mention 2. And then there is one open point that has not been dealt with that I'd like to get the working group advice on or opinion. Next. So the first request from Jim was to add the section on discarding the security context. I've now added this, and so the result is that the client must discard the security context associated with an RS when either the sequence number space ends, the access token associated with the context expires, the client receives a number of unauthorized responses to OSCOR requests. The exact number is not specified here. Or when the client creates a new security context from an old non-expired token. And the RS must discard the security context when, again, the sequence number space ends or when the access token associated with the context expires. So my question would be if you see any other situation where either the client or server have to discard the security context, please let me know. Yeah, so maybe you can take a look at this. If you have anything, just mail in the mailing list. Next. So another thing that was requested by Jim and has been requested a couple of times is to not use a COSI key structure to transport the OSCOR security context input parameters. And these parameters are master secret, salt identifiers. So I implemented this in this current version, and I use OSCOR security context structure that can either be JSON or CBOR. So I define a set of parameters, and I say that I give an example for an OSCOR security context in JSON, you can see, and I also use CDDL to define it in CBOR. And the set of parameters is the same. So that required a lot of added text, but the content is quite small. But so there is a registry creation, which is the registry for registering these parameters in the OSCOR security context. And I have put in expert review required right now. So if you think this is not the right guideline for registering, then, or policy, let me know. Then I also added the parameters registration, the CWT and JOT registration of the OSCOR security context structure, and also the guidelines which were taken from COSI, which might probably be improved. So right now I do not say anything about so it's expert review required, but it's also like IETF or specification required for other ranges of parameters. But I don't say anything about for these parameters to be created that will be linked to OSCOR. So maybe this is also something to think about. So yeah, you can think about this. Let me know if you have any comments. Next. And now I want to talk about the one issue left. So this also came up from Jim's review. The assumptions we have in this document is that the client and the RS can forget the security context, and also they can forget the tokens, and they do not keep track of all the tokens they've received. And another assumption is that the client can get an old non-expired token from the AS if it forgets it. Next. This was the previous protocol overview. So this was from version 2, the last version before all these updates. And what happens is that we get the access token. It contains a set of import parameters that is posted to the RS, and then the security context derivation happens, and the security context derived from it is used for OSCORE. Next. So that when we had this issue of client and resource server losing security context, there was a problem with reusing nonces. So I'm talking about AEAD nonces. So we had this proposal in, so this is in the version 05, and this adds 2 nonces, one created from the resource server and sent to the client, the other from the client to the server, and this would be input to the security context derivation. And this will avoid reuse of AEAD nonces and keys on both sides. Next. So first of all, I wanted to motivate why we are using these nonces. So the issue is, if the resource server loses its security context, then the client would repost the same token, assuming it's not expired. And then an attacker can replay an old OSCORE request that used that security context, and that would provoke reuse of nonces on the server side. So next, it's easier with a picture. So this is exactly what I just said. So the resource server goes down, loses its security context. The client retrieve or resends the token, maybe it still has it. And the resource server rederives the security context. And you can see that there was an attacker can replay an old request with an AEAD nonce, let's say with value A. And the resource server would then use that AEAD nonce to encrypt the response. So there will be a different message from the previous one. Next. To solve this problem, we have added this first nonce, which is the one from the RS to the client. And thanks to this, then the server will not reuse the same nonce, because it will create a different security context every time it goes down, basically. So next, to motivate the presence of the client nonce or the need for the client nonce, this is the issue. The client loses its security context and also its token. Then it gets a token posted to the resource server, and an on-path attacker replay an old message from the resource server to the client that contains an old nonce and 1. So it replaces this first nonce that we talked about before. And that would lead to reuse of nonces on the client side. So with the picture, next. So in the first OSCORE request and response, the client and resource server are using one security context that was derived with nonce N1. Then the client loses its security context. It gets the token, which is the same as before, and posts this token to the resource server. The resource server sends another nonce, but an attacker stops the message and replaces it with old message, which is with the nonce N1. So this will end up with the client deriving the same security context, and then reuse this security context for request. Next. So to solve this, we use the nonce N2. So because of these security issues, we consider that using nonces cannot be optional. So it's now mandatory in the draft. And the question that I have, first of all, if you see any problem with that, of course, please go to the mic and say so. Otherwise, the question to the working group is, how do we transport these nonces and include them in the OSCORE security context derivation? So next. The first proposal, which is the one that is currently in the draft, is to send the nonce from the resource server to the client in the payload of the 201 created response. and then send the second nonce together with the first nonce in the OSCOR request. So you can see that's the part in red. So this has the con that the resource server derives the security context when receiving an unknown key ID context, but I'm not sure that we can avoid that even in the other cases. And also we send both the nonces when only N2 is needed really from the client to the resource server. The pro of this proposal is that we don't use the salt parameter in the security context, and we leave that for the application to define it. Next. So the next proposal is we use one nonce as a salt, one nonce as an ID context. So the pro of this is almost exactly the same thing, but the pro is that we only need to send N2 in the request from the client to the resource server, and the con that we also use the salt, so an application cannot use that for something else. Next. And then the final proposal, which is the one that we prefer, we think is the cleanest one, is to actually the client to the resource server token be included in the payload of the post token to the resource server, and then the resource server will reply with the nonce in the payload of the 201 created. And then these two concatenated will be put in the ID context, and they will be included in the key derivation. So I think this is better because it's you don't need to send nonces in OSCOR messages. You do that before. The con or the biggest problem would be that this requires changes in ACE framework. So Ludwig, if you have opinions on that, because to be able to do this, we need to use the content format application ACE plus CBOR in the post-auth info request to the resource server, which right now is just, it doesn't have a content format. And basically the payload is the token directly. And what we want to do is to be able to send a CBOR map as a payload with the access token and the nonce together. So Ludwig or anybody else, do you have opinions on that? Is there anything in Jabber, maybe?
Michael would know.
Is Michael checking? Okay.
Jabber scribe, wake up.
Okay.
All right, so we have Ludwig.
Ludwig could have pushed the button too, because he's all remote. He likes proposal 3, I think. Proposal 3, we can use content format ACE plus CBOR while using ACE plus CWT when we send a token directly. Would need to define the ACE plus CWT content format. So I guess we need a new content format.
So why?
He's right there. Why doesn't he just talk?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me? I actually typed that out of a reflex and then remembered that I could just use Meet Echo. Yeah, so I do like this third proposal, and I think we need to define a new content type anyway for sending CWTs in ACE directly. So that would be this ACE plus CWT, and it to me makes sense to define that as a content format. And then profiles that use the auth info endpoint in the way that they directly send an access token, they can use this content type ACE plus CWT. And the OSCOR profile could use the content type ACE plus CBOR, indicating that there is a map structure in the post payload that contains the access token and other parameters. So I
yes,
like that.
But also right now in the ACE framework, the content format application ACE plus CBOR is only defined for client to AES and AES to client. It's not, nowhere it said that this can be used between client and resource server and vice versa. So
That's an oversight. That should be
okay.
amended.
Okay.
I'll create an issue as soon as we come out of the meeting.
Yes.
Ben Kaduk, and it's the end of the week, so I feel like I'm just seeing this for the first time, but purely from the information flow and like the crypto sense of the way you transmit and use the nonces, proposal 3 is best.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
In terms of the cryptographic use and transmission of the nonces, proposal 3 is the best.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Carsten, I'm very confused about what you just said about media types. Maybe you should stop here and say I'm just very confused. But plus CWT doesn't exist. And if you want to send a CWT, we have a CWT media type. So why do we need another one?
So maybe you're referring to what Ludwig said, because what I want defined in the ACE framework is the ACE plus CBOR, because I want to send a CBOR map that contains a nonce and a CWT. So that would be ACE plus CBOR. And then Ludwig was saying that he wants to define ACE plus CWT to send just CWT, not in a map. And then if you're saying a CWT exists already, then that's a comment for Ludwig, I guess, and if he wants to reply to that.
Let's take that offline.
Yeah.
Mike Jones wearing my OAuth and JOT context hat. In the SEC events working group, they finished the security event token draft, which was the first to want to use a plus JWT media type suffix. And it did create that and register it. It was used in a, for like SEC event plus JWT or something. So it wouldn't be unheard of at all for a draft, including one that's not the CWT draft, which didn't define the suffix, to do so if you think you need it. And you could copy the text from the security event token draft because the syntax is sort of wonky, but just copy it and cut and paste.
Okay, so I guess this is still related to discussion with Carsten and Ludwig about CWT content format. But I heard people saying they like proposal 3, which is great. That's also what we prefer. And then I have one final question next, which is about, should we use this same content format from for the 201 created response from the resource server? And can we use the register parameter nonce to send N1? So if you can go back one slide. So basically we have this 201 created, and what I was thinking could be also useful is to use content format same as the others, ACE plus CBOR, and then send the CBOR map with a nonce N1. And also, and this relates also to previous question, can we use this nonce? So this is, I think, a question for Ludwig first. There is a registered nonce that is sent from the AS to C. It has a CBOR label. And I was wondering if we can use that for also the post auth info request and the 201 created response.
Karsten, can you answer the CBOR question? Is there any problems with using a content type with a created response? He looks puzzled and not sure.
I mean, created has payload, so why wouldn't it have content format?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
So Carsten on the mic.
It just needs to be
Yeah, I don't
specified in the framework.
As long as the media type doesn't start to mean something completely different in a 201 as in another place, no, there's no problem with that.
Okay. Still, the question for Ludwig stays because right now this nonce is registered only for this AS to client response. Can we make it more general and use it also for other requests and responses? Yeah. Okay. Great. So that's it. I think we answered all the so.
What do you think your scheduling is?
So we only have this proposal to include and get it right. Probably get some reviews will be very useful. So hopefully I can do this in the next 2 weeks, and then I can upload a new version and I can get the reviews on that.
So we can start in early December?
Yes. That's good.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, Mike, you were going to talk about proof of possession. Again, no working clicker, so just place it next.
Not many slides. Mike Jones, Microsoft. I wanted to update you on the progress we've made on the proof of possession key semantics for CBER Web Tokens draft. Next. So we've already been talking about this in the meeting, but just as a refresher, the CWT POP spec is the CBOR equivalent or the CWT equivalent of the JSON Web Token POP, which is RFC 7800. CWT, as a refresher, became an RFC in May. CWT POP is also required for a number of ACE specs, including the ACE OAuth authorization draft. So there is a normative dependency on that. We conducted working group last call after IETF 101. We published draft 03 that addressed most of the comments. We published draft 04 earlier this week to attempt to address those that Roman had thankfully identified that we as the editors had missed. So we took a stab at doing that. Almost all of those were Jim's. Roman cleared his. Jim said that there was one major thing that we missed, which is during Montreal, Jim had suggested text on the list to effectively give people warnings about security things you have to think about if you're using a key ID as the confirmation method. And the editors, myself included, spaced on getting that in. I read that earlier today, and modulo, cleaning up nits in the text, I'm happy including that. So expect a new draft with more security statements about what can possibly go wrong if you use a key ID from our ever paranoid Jim, which he laughs and smiles shortly. Next. What did we change in 04? We removed 2 sentences that people found confusing and were actually unnecessary to the exposition. We corrected some type descriptions in IANA. And there's an active thread on the mailing list that you may have seen this week that does describe the responses in detail. And again, thanks to Roman for putting the list together to help us out in finishing. Next. So we believe that it's probably time for a Shepherd review, which could start in parallel with us adding a few paragraphs that Jim has already thankfully written for us. Roman, I believe you're the Shepherd.
Absolutely, I'm the Shepherd, and I have part of the write-up ready. So I'm ready for the -05, and I'm happy to press forward.
Very good. next. That may be the last slide. Any questions or discussion? Thank you for all the useful comments during working group last call.
My usual question, -05, when do you think?
I may be able to turn that out tomorrow.
Phenomenal.
We have this Friday for side meetings, and I only have one that's in the afternoon. So to the extent I can get stuff off my plate, great.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that update. Okay. We have the nice background music. So next up, Michael is going to talk to us about COAP and EST. Should have kept the music as you walked up.
Yeah, it would be good. Where's the pink circle? Pink X? I guess we're not doing that here. Hi, so my name is Michael Richardson. This is the COAP EST document. Deals with constrained vouchers. You know what? I kind of screwed up the title, didn't I? Yeah.
Some cutting and pasting.
I copy and pasted too much. Anyway, it's just about COAP EST. It's not about that other stuff. Next slide, please. So major things in 06, we moved the changelog to the front. So that makes a lot of diffs. We just clarified some of the discovery parts. It's a bit unclear to some of us whether we really need to do discovery. We have resource type values early allocated to from IANA, and we made clear what were compulsory and optional endpoints. We don't need one of the code points because it's in the content, the multi-part content type. Next slide, please. I think the most exciting thing is that we have had a group of people from, well, 3 groups, but 4 companies, because one has a server only and one has a client only, who have been doing virtual interop testing every Tuesday. For me, it's 10 a.m., but it's 1500 UTC. They even tested last week without me, and this week I decided to go to sleep instead of hanging out with them at 10 p.m. And they continued on, so that's great. So we've been doing this online. If you have code that you want to test, then you just need a public IP if you're a server, and if you're not, then you can just do it from your laptop behind 6 layers of NAT, I suppose. The biggest problems we had the first meeting, we were just basically, well, do you need a trust anchor? Are you promiscuous? Will you renew any certificate? Do you trust the server that you're going to talk to? Are you a client? And we had conversations back and forth, and different people had different settings and different assumptions. We made a mailing list for this because it was easier than trying to figure out what the CC list is. It won't last very long. And continuing on, I would say there hasn't been a lot of feedback. Once we figured out how to operate our own software, things mostly worked. I think we are now at the point where, I don't know what the status is from this week, but last week it was, wow, that CSR was really cool, it looks right, and I wonder why my software didn't like it, kind of thing. So that's not in the realm of things that are specific in this document, but rather just general interoperability stuff of PKIX. So that's really positive. Next slide. I think that might be even it, yeah. So we think there are no issues. One of the things we are concerned about is that EST COAP is not a protocol really that stands on its own. It's either a building block for other protocols such as Brewski or some other things that people are doing. It is useful for entities that wish to renew certificates in the field, for manufacturers that are shipping devices with pre-built anchors for their customers. So in other words, the device is not generic, but rather is a specific device for a specific customer, which is quite common in the metering industry. You sell a customer, 100,000 meters, and you give them the firmware they want, okay, that with the trust anchors that they expect. So that's a kind of a it's a very, very clear vertical. And this is the kind of thing they want to do, right? So we're a little bit concerned that it's not going to survive widespread IESG comments without some use cases to understand why it's secure and not. At the same time, we kind of feel that the use case, detailing the use cases may be a rat hole of boiling oceans here. So Hannes, I would love your opinions on this.
Yeah, so our use case is in the context of device management for IoT.
Yeah,
like with Lightweight M2M, and I think that's also true for a number of companies here.
Yeah. So do you think we should include that in a one paragraph somewhere to say here's a use case, or do you think it's opening up a door of we shouldn't?
I'm obviously, it's not a secret. Like we are very vocal about those use cases, and so it's Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei, and so it's not a
right
something that should be shocking, you know.
No, it's not shocking. It's it's very much vertical, right? And because you cannot
actually
really,
it's cross. Like we use that like mostly in the industrial space, but in very broad sectors, like for energy, for transportation, for etc.
What I'm trying to say is that it's between the vendor and their customer, and I mean it's vertical, and it tends not to be between two systems that the customer has arbitrarily purchased or randomly purchased from different vendors. Okay, this is not internet level kind of interoperability, any web browser to any server, right? Because the trust anchors just don't exist generically in a product, right? If you don't put the trust anchors in, it doesn't work.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay.
So we provision those trust anchors during manufacturing.
Right, I understand that. And therefore that device becomes specific to a specific, maybe even customer.
Jim Schott from the floor. I'm a little bit lost. So EST is secured by some form of TLS.
Correct.
So what you are actually talking about here is not how the channel is secured, but how you establish trust in the channel. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. That I don't think is a huge issue.
That's good. Do you think we have to add any text to say how this happens? No. Good. I prefer to say nothing than to say something that winds up being something people will say, no, but what about this case? What about this case? You've excluded something. Zach, you're happy too? I see nods from Mike Jones as well. Christian?
Well, I mean, speaking as someone who has been reviewing the use of Brusky in a similar context, the point is that Brusky is a trade-off. So it's a trade-off that allows you to do a configuration of devices that you have bought from a manufacturer. And so effectively, the use case is pretty much what you described, is that someone buys 100 widgets from a manufacturer takes 100 undifferentiated widgets from the warehouse and ship them to the guy unpacks them, and at that moment, magic happens because they go to the manufacturer site and say, oh, these are the one you bought, I'll put the right software on them. That's a fine use case.
Yeah.
And you should actually describe it in about that level of detail so that people understand what you're doing. The reason why people are crazy is that it seems that if then the guys who bought the device wants to resell them,
right? But
there is a dependency at that point.
Yep.
With the manufacturer kind of agreeing, and that's where the crux is.
Right. But this protocol that we're talking about right now doesn't have any of that magic. This is protocol right now. This document is there is a client. It has a list of owners or an owner, and there's an owner that has a list of manufacturers that they're accepting, and that's statically configured, period. There's no magic, there's no other stuff that's happening. So, but you can also use this protocol later on as part of some magic, but that's not this document on itself.
Yeah, but I mean, basically the IESG rat hole, as you said, that you fear, is based on what I described. So if you alleviate that fear somehow, that'll be nice.
Right. That's why I'm asking. Do we need to have a use case part here that narrows the scope enough so there's no argument?
I don't think, I wouldn't worry about comments from the ISG that haven't even happened yet. Go ahead. Like this document is defining on how to carry ESD over CoAP.
Yep.
We have another earlier document that said how to carry ESD over HTTP. It didn't talk about these other use cases either. Why would that be a problem now?
I agree with you. That's why I think it's if EST could be published, then this is good. I'm trying to avoid text and work that I think could be unending. That's all.
Ben Kadek, I mean, yes, Christian, that's one potential thing that the ISG could be concerned about, but I think Michael was thinking more about the sense of, well, I'm putting in this use case that I'm describing, but the use case would only be for one manufacturer's devices talking to the same manufacturer's devices, and like that's not a thing where you need the interoperability that we come to the IETF to get. Right. And so by not mentioning that use case that is sort of a local use case or a local to the manufacturer interaction use case, you avoid the question.
Right. Well, it's not exactly local to manufacturer, but the point is that manufacturer arranges the trust appropriate for the scenario.
Yeah, the ISG, the concern is that the ISG would say, look at this and say, the only use case you're documenting is not a case that we need to care about. So why do we need to care about this?
Right.
EST doesn't say with whom you're onboarding.
Correct.
Okay. And the real problem is not so much, I mean, the discussion we had relative to Brusky is that Brusky is extending EST into a 3-party protocol instead of a 2-party protocol. As long as you have a 2-party protocol, I can't see the issue.
This is the 2-party protocol constraint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're happy, then
Christian Wittmer.
Then I think we're all happy. And I think that's the last slide. And Jim asked if it was ready for a last call earlier on Monday, and I said I would know by Thursday, and I'm pretty sure by this point we're ready for last call.
Does anyone disagree that it's ready for last call?
The next version.
Okay, so Peter has some edits to make. Good.
Right.
Okay.
So next question.
Peter will finish the edits by.
Yes. Yeah, that's the next question. When could we see those edits by? Beginning of December.
That's what I heard.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And then we're ready to go to working group last call off with that draft.
So that would be what, December 1 or December 2, 3 p.m.
We're gonna say December.
Thank you.
Don't need to finesse it any more than that. Okay, thanks. Okay, last up on our agenda is we were going to talk about adoption kinds of things. Let me get our slides ready here. Yeah, I did not. Oh, right. Should have been there. The data tracker is as tired as we are. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so we have 3 drafts related to group communications. These drafts have been presented several times in previous meetings, but the chairs have been saying, we don't want to adopt any new work until we actually see some documents go into working group last call. We've seen documents go into working group last call.
And we're very excited.
And we are very excited. We get to make Ben's life more difficult before too long. So basically, there's 3 documents. The first has to do with, let's see, Right. So the first document, it has to do with how do we do keying in the ACE OAuth profile for group communications. So there's basically 3 questions we're going to ask. Are you in? Well, actually 2 questions. Well, 3 questions. Do you think it's worthwhile to do? Are you willing to review? Are you thinking about potentially implementing? So we'll basically go through that with each of these 3 drafts. Ben, do you want to stand up and listen to Francesca?
So before we go for that call for the second document, the PubSub, as an author, I wanted to say that this was not updated lately, and this is not being prioritized by the authors, also because of the PubSub work being a bit delayed in core. So yeah, it's less priorities for.
Is that code for we should not talk about it for adoption?
That's your decision, but yeah.
Okay. That's
Okay.
yeah. Let's start with the top one.
Start with the top one. How many of you believe that we should be adopting this work? It's worthwhile to do. How many of you do not believe it's worthwhile to do? How many of you have no idea?
So there is +2 hums in the jobber.
Okay.
For work being adopted. 3 actually.
How many people are willing to review this document? Stick your hand up. Peter, Ari.
3, 4.
Ludwig and Wouter in the jobber.
So it's about 6 people.
Yeah.
Then implementation.
Anyone think that they might actually implement this? Okay. So we got a couple people.
2 implementers. Corrections.
1 more in jobber.
Okay, so that's 3.
Okay.
Ludwig.
So the next one up is the PubSub profile draft.
Well, I mean, actually, before we do that, I mean, what do we do with that? So there's interest, but that's not, are we going to adopt it?
Well, basically, okay. My stand on this is basically the chairs and the AD talk about it, and then we send to the list.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good with that. All right. Yes, Karsten.
Are we done with GroupCom? Okay, on the PubSub profile, I would like to repeat my comment that it's not really about PubSub. It's about communication with multiple senders and multiple receivers, of which PubSub is one instance. So I'm not sure that the fact that the PubSub document in the core is not moving forward very fast is keeping us from making use of this.
Okay. Yeah, author lack of interest may. Okay, so how many people believe that this is work worth doing? Please. How many people believe it's something we should not be doing? Please. How many people have no idea?
One more hum for doing it.
The people who, the loudest group seem to be the people who have no idea. Does anyone want to stand up and say what they would like to hear to have a better idea?
I do have an idea. So, but I just want to say that I think this is important work, but I think it's not phased really yet with things going on in core and other things. It hasn't been prioritized. So let's come back to this question about adoption at a later meeting, I think would be my suggestion.
Well, let's go ahead and finish this. If you are willing to review it, raise your hand.
I see 3.
Yeah.
Ish.
Implementation. That's a bit more of a problem.
I see no one.
Yeah. Okay, the key management for OSCOR groups. Can you give me a 30-second summary of this document? Because I don't think I can at the moment.
So there was one more hand for review, Ludwig.
Okay.
Marco Tiloca RISE, it's an incarnation of the first one, so using the model and message format of the first draft to describe exactly how to do key provisioning and group rekeying to enable communication with OSCOR as per group OSCOR.
Okay. How many of you think this is worth doing? How many of you believe this is not worth doing? How many of you have no idea?
Three more hums for doing it.
If you're willing to review, raise your hand, please.
I see 3.
I see 3, yeah. And I assume Ludwig is 2.
Ludwig.
If you would think about implementing this.
Sorry, one more willing to review in the jobber.
About 5. And I saw 2 implementers.
Yes. I saw 2 implementers.
2.5. I saw hand wave 2.
Okay. So basically the chairs will try to get together with Ben, talk about it, and we'll actually send this to the mailing list, since everything like this actually needs to occur on the mailing list.
That's great. Okay. All right. Thank you for all of that feedback and helping us determine. And again, thanks kind of for the patience with the sequencing as we were waiting for the original documents to go to working group last call before we can start thinking about this additional slate of work. Comment? Yes.
Ari Keran, one more comment on the PubSub profile. I understand that it's a lower priority than the other 2, but still it's pretty much the normative reference for PubSub broker, which we are planning to finish. It's been slower than we expected, but are planning to finish still. So it would be unfortunate if that work would be pending on this document for a long time. So eventually being working group adopted would be, relatively soon, would be nice.
Ari, I've been hearing that about PubSub now for 1.5 years.
I know.
I'll believe it when I actually see a substantial document.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a substantial document, and yes, we have some of your review comments still to be addressed. But it's not something that is started just recently. There are implementations and relatively stable document. We have to figure out some aspects on how it does relate to some other more recent work. That's why we didn't do an update for this IETF. But otherwise, it's pretty stable thing, and we should be able to push it through the finish line relatively soon.
Okay, Ludwig was next, and then it'll be Johannes. Ludwig, the floor is yours.
Hello. We had a while ago also a profile presented for using ACE with MQTT. I would like to ask if there is any interest on pursuing that work, because my impression was that MQTT is a protocol that is pretty commonly used in the sensor networks area. So I have this impression that this might be useful. I don't know if the authors of that draft are participating remotely or in person.
The authors of that draft right now have basically, the last thing I heard from them was they were basically working on it and they weren't actually ready to go into working group status for various reasons.
Hi, this is Hannes. One thing I was wondering what we can do about this, at least quotes problem, is it would be nice to actually see more product implementation of the work we are doing in this group. I see a lot of prototype implementations. That's great. Running code is great. But we need some deployment, right? And so how do we get there? It's one thing to push the documents through quickly, but kind of quickly. But you know what I'm hinting to?
Carsten Bormann. If I had money to implement a product, would I invest in something where I don't know whether the ISG is going to hold it up for 2 or for 3 years? We need to push these documents through. And then we will get the product implementation. No, I'm quite serious. Right now, we are not showing that we are able to complete work, and that damages the reputation and makes this work less useful out there. So I think that's just not a very useful argument. Now, on the PubSub profile, I think the confusion is that you actually need a document like the core PubSub document to make use of this profile. But that's not the case. PubSub is just more or less an example application, a way you can do PubSub. But there are so many other ways in which multiple senders and multiple receivers can work together that don't all need to be standardized. But they will definitely benefit from a standardized way to do security with multiple senders and multiple receivers. So the PubSub profile is even useful without any core PubSub document being out there. So maybe this has been represented a little bit different from how it actually will be used. I'm not so sure it's going to be used and only within the core PubSub application.
So Zach Shelby, all hats off, just me. I just categorically disagree with Carsten's initial statement. I think we as internet engineers need to go and build real things for real applications for real people or computers or companies or whoever. Get some experience out there on how useful is it? Does it take off? Are people interested? And we don't have to have an RFC before we do that. It doesn't have to be a working group document. And I think one of the things that's holding us back from getting stuff done is there's just too much clutter here. We've got feature creep in every working group around IoT. I see like 50 new drafts coming in, 3 new working group drafts every IETF. And none of the core stuff that people really need to deploy these IoT systems is getting done because there's all this other work going on. So stop the feature creep, focus on the things that really are getting deployed, get some more experience from those deployments, from real customer cases, and then come back and say, hey, we implemented this thing because we had a real use case with a real customer and they needed this new feature. No, stop my rant there. I think my point's made.
Just reply when you're
done.
So, sorry. From the Jabber, we have Wouter saying, the idea is that organizations like OCF will be using referencing GroupCom and OSCOAP joining. And to be able to use it from OCF perspective, it needs to be an RFC, not a draft, not work in progress.
So that's this is Hannes. This is another common misconception. We have the same people going on in different organizations and making dependencies and then creating the need for work. So as an example, Carsten, we've been deploying co-op over TCP long before it got finished. It unfortunately took too long, so we actually later had problems with different versions, but that's a separate story. So you can do that, but for example, since the ACE, some of the ACE stuff the framework stuff is getting finalized, I would encourage the people in this room to actually talk to their own peers, not just convince people in the room that it would be useful to implement and deploy it, to actually get that real feedback, because then, like in the way we deploy it, we saw some of the issues that what our customers cared about. And I think that's valuable feedback. And then once we go through this iteration, we may need to fine tune as a second step. It's sort of like a circle.
Carsten, I agree that there is a little bit of a problem with the deployability of the ACE stuff. And those who were in Yokohama know what went wrong. But we've gone through the process now, and we have something that actually might be workable. Yeah, I'm not sure that having a product is a prerequisite to writing a document, is a prerequisite to getting an RFC. We're working in a slightly more complex environment where we have other SDOs that are looking to the IETF providing building blocks. And yes, not all of these building blocks will be successful. So that's very hard to plan which ones of those will be successful. But the question on whether ARM is interested in implementing it or not is not necessarily the gating function here.
Yeah, so Zach Shelby. So excuse me when I talk about products, and what I really mean is implementations. It doesn't have to be but not a research implementation, Carsten, hold on. Not a research implementation. Talking about a deployed implementation that is of product quality that people can really use on the internet. Use as in to do something, not use as in to experiment with. I think we need to see more of that. It doesn't have to come from companies. It can come from private individuals. It can come from nonprofits, wherever. But I think we need some real implementation experience and feedback from people who are using it. So evidence that we really need it. And that doesn't have anything to do with ARM or Ericsson or any other company. This is just a way of working that shows, hey, there's somebody that needs something. They've seen this to be useful. They need something more for a real reason, and that's great. And I think we should hold other SDOs up to this as well. We've seen tons of feature creep in OCF, in OMA, and in many other places. So I think we also should ask other SDOs that, hey, it's great that you want this. What's your use case? Do you have real deployments and implementations? If not, could you go do that and come back to us? So maybe just that bar for implementation should be a little bit higher. And this is not about ACE. This is just a more general thing about the whole IoT space at the IETF at the moment.
Jonas Elander, Ericsson. So this seems like a very good opportunity to get back to old controversies in ACE. I will not do that, but that was very tempting. In this case, in this particular case, the group com, it's not a feature creep. This is exactly what is requested. This is you heard the witness from OCF. The chair from Fair Hair Alliance sends me an email and says, what can we do to make you progress this into an RFC? I mean, what else can we get here? I mean, we have to respect, as Carsten says, if it takes 2 years, maybe they will do something else. But here we have companies standing behind. They want to have a standard for this. I don't see the problem.
And Wouter from the Jabber, who, by the way, says he's the technical steering committee chair of OCF. And he says that is why OCF is talking regularly to Thing.
This doesn't contradict that some companies do advanced products of something they believe in. We could have both approaches. I don't see the problem with that either. So it doesn't have to be one way or the other. So I think it's excellent that ARM is getting doing advanced copy of ACE or cooperative TCP. It's really good.
Yeah, but we on a group communication, so we have been working in an alliance, the OpenAIS Alliance, and actually we are in the process of releasing that code that we worked on back then, which was documented in one of our documents, which unfortunately got shut down by Mike St. Jones because he didn't like the symmetric key version of it. But we'll nevertheless release the code so people can play with it and make use of it.
So if we're done with this discussion, then I have a comment about or a summary about MQTT profile status from Anthony. We've been keeping draft up to date, currently waiting for group to be ready to consider it.
Okay, thank you for all of that feedback. Anyone else that wants to speak at the mic? We have a smidge of time left.
Hannes, again, so we are in lightweight M2M OMA. We had released version 1.1 not too long ago, which is, I think, a good achievement. And we are going to do a Plugfest in Trop event early next year. So that includes a couple of features developed in the co-working group. And so if you guys have interest to participate and test certain features also, maybe even if you are not an OMM member, doesn't matter, because you can come to the Plugfest. Anyone can come to the Plugfest or TestFest, and we are working on the test specifications right now. So I encourage you to come and help us to test the specifications. I can send a mail to the list. Badu, is the Badu here? He has all the details. I think that's I will look it up in April next year in Amsterdam. Oh, Chennai, actually, not Amsterdam.
Yeah, talking about the Plugfest, one question that came up in the hallway is that maybe in Prague we could try to have more than 2 days for Plugfest, because it turns out 2 days is you just get up to speed and then the time is already up. So maybe we should look at ways to do more. Maybe start on Wednesday already or something like that, so we have some continuous time for people to actually make progress. So that's just an idea that's floating around. We still have a little bit of time before Prague to make it happen. But if people are interested in a slightly extended form of such an event, doing SUIT, doing ACE, doing other co-related stuff, that would be a good time to contact maybe Hannes and me and other people who are interested in that.
Okay, thanks for that. Oh, one more, Jessica.
So it's my turn to ask the questions to the chair. When do you think we can get the decision on this then, after you talk to the AD, and like when can we expect
We're going to take things to the mailing list as needed, probably a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so to wrap things up as it relates to the timelines on the documents and milestones relative to the framework document, there will be an update published in December. In the DTLS profile, again, also likely December, with the OSCOR profile end of November, and then we're going to do another review in December. With the proof of possession, probably very, very soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. And then for the COAP EST, there's another update that's going to get pushed out in December, and then we go to working group last call on that draft. And that summarizes where we stand with all the drafts. And as was answered before I started, the chairs are going to talk with our AD to work the adoption, and we'll put some things on the mailing list, and that'll be a couple weeks. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Safe travels home to everyone.